First of all, you've seen the most recent Quinnipiac poll.
Yes.
How vulnerable do you think Governor Malloy is?
Well, it looks like a real race. I mean, this probably will be a tough year for incumbents generally, Congress, state officials, but obviously the numbers say it's a dead heat between the governor and Tom Foley, and Mayor Boughton, State Senator McKinney are not so far behind. So I think it's going to be a very lively election year.
Right. You've seen also that there's independents who say they won't vote for Malloy, and there are Democrats who won't vote for Malloy. And now we have a potential insurgent spoiler in John Pelto. You know John Pelto. You know a little bit about third-party races. The most successful being yours and Senator Weicker.
Yeah.
Obviously, you both had high name recognition going into it, which Pelto does not. But do you think that he could do some damage? Do you think?
Yeah, so I think that if John Pelto runs, because he is a Democrat and he is more liberal, that he probably would hurt Governor Malloy more than the Republican candidate. It's hard to imagine that he could win, but he could have an effect on the outcome. And this is true of third-party candidates in America generally. Very rarely do third-party candidates win. I mean, I was lucky, and remember, I came off of that very visible primary with Ned Lamont, so to a certain extent I became, not voluntarily, a cause, and I was the incumbent senator after all. It's harder for somebody to come in as a third-party candidate unless they got an enormous amount of money and really win an election, but they can affect the outcome, and I'd say if John Pelto gets in, it's probably going to hurt Governor Malloy.
Right. Because the last one, if it is Foley and Malloy, and there's a third guy, and it was so close the last time, the presumption would be if it is close this time, that the third guy, in this case, if it was Pelto, would pull away in some of the cities from Malloy.
It's possible. I mean, or he might just reduce Dan Malloy's margin in the cities. I mean, if I may speak from a painful chapter in my personal life, when you were there, as Walter Cronkite used to say, in the 2000 election when I ran for vice president, it was all decided in Florida. Ralph Nader was on the ballot, and if he hadn't been, my guess is that Al Gore and I would have clearly carried that state. So, and now, I don't remember exactly, Mark, but Ralph Nader maybe got 2% of the vote, but 2% would have been enough to change that election. So, I mean, that's a challenge for Dan Malloy. I mean, Dan's, I think, a very good campaigner, so he's got the challenge in any case, but certainly if John Pelto runs as an independent, to bring back Democrats and independents who right now say that they're not going to vote for him.
But there is always, I mean, the Democrats have a good organization that Democrats who say they don't like him now will come home to him.
This happens a lot, and particularly if it gets framed as, okay, you're not happy with everything I've done, says Dan Malloy, but do you really want Tom Foley or whoever's the Republican candidate to be your next governor? And a lot of times that works with the Democratic base.
Let's talk about that Republican. I mean, it appears right now that Foley gets the convention endorsement, and at least one or possibly two of them get the 15% to do a primary. The Quinnipiac poll indicated that any one of them was within striking distance of Malloy, which at this point is quite encouraging, I would think, for the candidate.
Yeah, it's true, and it presents a challenge for Governor Malloy. I mean, the incumbent, I think, always has certain advantages, so you certainly can't say anything more than it's going to be a race. You can't say that Dan Malloy is not going to win. I think he has at least a 50-50 chance to win. But what's interesting about the numbers in the last Quinnipiac poll is that Mayor Boughton and State Senator McKinney run pretty close to the governor, as well as Tom Foley running in a dead heat. So that means that there's a, for want of a more gracious term, an anti-Malloy vote out there, and that too is what the governor has to work to turn around.
Yeah, obviously, Tom Foley still has name recognition because of all the advertising 4 years ago, whereas McKinney and Boughton really don't.
And you can see that in the poll too. They're much less well known than Tom Foley, although McKinney and Boughton run pretty close to where Foley is against Malloy.
Yeah. So there's an anti-Malloy vote out there, and it's not just Republicans.
That's true.
Yeah. Because you're a guy who, in your last election, won with Republican, Democrat, and independent votes, which is really what you need to do, right?
In Connecticut, I know most people are now say, well, Connecticut's a blue state, but remember, Dan Malloy is the first Democratic governor since Bill O'Neill left office in 1990. That's a long time ago. And I think the state can go either way. I mean, still, there's a very large group of unaffiliated independent voters. Now, I was lucky to get like 55% by exit polls of the independents and 70% of the Republicans last time I ran. But that's the way. You got to get, you can't win with one party in a Connecticut election, and actually that's something very good to say.
But the difference, I think, everyone looks at that, so well, we didn't have a Democratic governor since O'Neill. But after O'Neill, remember, there were multiple candidates who all were viable, strong candidates. Remember the first time when Rowland won the first time, there were 4 candidates who all got a significant portion of votes.
Right.
And the second time too.
Yeah.
And multiples. I mean, that's the way a Republican can win. When
Oh, you mean that there was more than one candidate on the ballot?
Right.
That's right. And well, let's go back to Lowell Weicker. He won with, I don't remember exactly, but I think he got, when he ran for governor, about 40% of the vote. He didn't get a majority because there was, he was an independent. There was a Democrat and a Republican.
Rowland the first time won with 34% of the vote because there were 4 candidates.
That's right. See, there are certain things you remember that even I don't remember, Mark. I'm impressed.
Well, so there's a primary for the Republicans. Does it hurt them or harm them? Because the governor keeps going along and gets coverage because he's a governor.
Yeah.
And they get coverage of the 2 guys battling each other the way Fideli and Foley did the last time.
So I'd say it depends. I mean, it depends on what kind of primary it is. In the old days in Connecticut, primaries were very rare. I mean, it's a long time ago, but we didn't have our first primary statewide in Connecticut until 1970. Most of the rest of the country was having primaries for all of the last century. The party bosses pretty much controlled. They hated primaries. They thought they divided the party. And they still do, right. But you know what? It's easier to run a primary in Connecticut now, and you're not going to stop somebody who really wants to do it. So when I said it depends, when you asked me how a Republican primary would affect a November election, if it's really bloody and divisive and people get so angry and hateful that they're not going to vote for the winner of the primary, that's a problem. But on the other hand, it tends to draw media interest when you have a primary, and at some point the party bosses can try as hard as they may and will to stop a primary, but it's up to the candidates. You know, people come to me and say, should I run a primary over the years, or should I even get into a race? And I say, really got to answer 2 questions. One, can you make a case that you're that much better or better than the other candidates? That's the most important thing. Second thing is, do you have a chance to win? You don't have to, nobody will have a guarantee that you can win, but do you have a chance to win? And if you do, go for it.
If you have clever advertising and operators,
that helps
the guy apart.
Yeah, well, that's the danger, of course, that the winner ends up a lesser figure because he's been bloodied or she's been bloodied in their own party primary.
We should talk about Tom Foley and his wealth, because it's been an issue. As far as I can remember, and we've had a lot of what we call self-funding candidates. We still don't know if he's going to be a self-funding candidate. He just put out a press release saying he has made the $250,000 so he can get to the public funding. But as far as I can recall, he's the only self-funder who ever came close. I mean, Linda McMahon lost by 12 points twice. There was a Brooke Johnson got clobbered by Dodd.
You and I are probably the only 2 people in Connecticut who remember Brooke Johnson.
He spent quite a bit of money.
He did.
But my point is, and Tom Foley has mentioned this himself, that the self-funding millionaire candidate doesn't do well. People got a bad taste in their mouth because of Linda McMahon.
Well, here's my feeling about a self-funding candidate. I'm a sort of a very wealthy candidate. Just the fact that they have money and they're spending it on a campaign, I don't think really affects many voters at all. But if their wealth can be associated with something that bothers voters, then they got a problem. So here's what I mean. Brooke Johnson ran against Chris Dodd way back. He looked like an attractive candidate, but somebody did some research to find that one of the ways he made his money was to buy some factories around, companies around Connecticut, not around the country really, not Connecticut, and lay off a lot of people.
Same thing with Tom Foley.
Yeah, well, so that happened with Mitt Romney, I heard. And with Linda McMahon, she was associated with some bad practices in the wrestling business. So I think if the wealth can be associated with something that bothers people, then it can be a problem in an election. But just the fact that you got money, I think sometimes it helps people. Like Mike Bloomberg in New York was helped, I think, that he had the money because everybody felt, well, this guy's going to be clean because he doesn't need to be corrupt.
Right. Well, it's an interesting thing. Dick Blumenthal has a ton of money, and a lot of people don't even know it.
That's true.
You know, because he's always funded in the traditional fashion.
Yeah.
So that's enough with the law. We should talk about the 5th Congressional District. That seems to be the most, the district that may get the most attention. This Mark Greenberg is obviously going to be the nominee again. Elizabeth Esty is the first termer. That was even during the gerrymandering, I shouldn't call it that, the redistricting was redistricted to be a competitive district.
Right.
Do you see some vulnerability for any Democrats, maybe her, in this fall?
Well, I can tell you in Washington, certainly the Republicans and to a certain extent the Democrats feel that the one competitive congressional race in the state will be the 5th Congressional District. You know, for a long time, people felt that the most Republican congressional district was the 4th because it was Fairfield County, very wealthy, but it's really not. I mean, it's more of a swing district.
Yeah, because of Bridgeport and Norwalk.
Stanford, right. But the 5th is much more competitive. The Democrats in Washington feel that Elizabeth Esty has built a good record. She's a good candidate, and she's going to win. But believe me, they're not taking it for granted. I think it'll be the most competitive race, and you'll see a lot of national money coming into that 5th congressional race.
And they feel that Mark Greenberg, the Republican, is probably too far to the right for Connecticut.
That'll definitely be the message.
Yeah,
right.
Well, let's talk about national politics. Let's talk about 16. Well, we have that time, right? You
Go ahead, sure. For you?
What do you think of this Karl Rove suggesting that Hillary Rodham Clinton might have a mental issue because of her, what they have run down an injury that she's totally recovered from?
You know, I was really surprised when Karl Rove mentioned that about Hillary Clinton. I got to tell you, I for one forgot about it. I hadn't remembered that she had that fall, but then I did remember in some strange way. It may be helpful to her that Rove did this so early because they can get it out and sort of deal with it and not have it come up, assuming she runs for president in the middle of a presidential campaign. I mean, from all that I know, I've seen her, you know, since that happened. She seems totally fit and smart and able. She keeps a very busy schedule. And it's going to get busier. It's going to get busier with the book tour coming up. And, you know, doctors who have been quoted since Rove made the comment about her fall and concussion have said that they think she's totally recovered. So it did put it in people's minds. But as I say, Rove might have done Hillary a favor by bringing it up so early and getting it out of the way.
Do you think she's going to run?
Everything I see tells me that Hillary Clinton's going to run, but you know, it's up to her, obviously, and she's got to make the final say. But you can see kind of a gathering of the forces. The Clinton loyalists are already raising money. They're putting things in place, and look, her whole life leads to this. I mean, this is a moment I think that she would feel is a moment of destiny. I mean, she certainly feels she's as ready as anybody out there to be a good president, and of course she'd be the first woman president. So it's not that she would win is not a foregone conclusion, and I think she probably knows that as well as anybody.
Well, who among the Republicans would you see as a competitive candidate against her? Your friend John McCain? He won't do it again.
No, no. That's. The Republican race is going to really be interesting. I mean, the answer is I don't know. Everybody right now looks much less experienced than Hillary, but
Jeb Bush.
No, Jeb Bush is actually gaining some favor now, which is in Republican circles. he's running behind Hillary in polling, but it's real early, and he's not that far behind. He could probably make it a race, and it's fascinating that it would be two of America's political dynasties. Right. For this great democracy of ours, we seem to be developing dynasties.
Well, that's the only thing I've heard that may hurt Bush, that people see it as this family that's, you know, this would be the third Bush.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, Mrs. Clinton it's not so much a dynasty. I mean, they're related by marriage. It's not like they're brothers, sisters,
right.
father, son, daughter.
Right.
You know,
so I think that the Republicans who like Jeb Bush think that the fact that he'd be running against Hillary Clinton essentially negates the idea of a dynasty. Right. But on the other hand, there are unique features to Hillary's candidacy, obviously the most significant of which is that she'd be the first woman president, and that has resonance for a lot of people.
And you can't run, I mean, we've talked about this before, a man can't run against a woman the same way he would run against a man. I mean, you say equal rights, all is set aside, that something that comes out of a man's mouth that sounds mean or whatever about a woman candidate can be interpreted very harshly by viewers and listeners.
You have to be careful, and Hillary's strong. She's been through a lot herself with her husband, years as Secretary of State, so she could take a punch and give it back. But anybody who's thinking about punching her better think twice about how they do it, because it can backlash and hurt the person attacking. Yeah.